Welcome to true Wild West love stories, where every legend hides a heartbeat, and every scar tells a truth. Thank you for watching True Wild West Love Stories, where every legend hides a heartbeat. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And tell us in the comments, the desert learned his name long before any town did. It learned the weight of his boots and the rhythm of his horse, the way he crossed dry washes without haste, and rode the wind as if it were a page written for him alone. He rode through the high country where the land lifted into stone, and fell back into sand where the sun burned like a promise and a threat at once. He was a man shaped by distance, by losses uncounted, by a long habit of moving on before the ground grew soft beneath his feet. In those years, the West was not a place so much as a trial. It tested men with thirst and silence, with nights so cold they cut and days so bright they blinded. It asked what a man would give to survive and what he would keep no matter the cost. He had answered the desert with endurance, had given it his youth and taken from it a kind of wisdom that did not speak but settled in the bones. His name mattered less than his shadow, long and narrow in the evening light, stretching ahead of him as if it were leading the way. He rode alone by choice. Companionship, he had learned, made loss heavier. The graves he remembered were unmarked, the faces already blending with memory like smoke. He had once imagined a different life, land fenced and broken, a woman's laughter in evenings, a future that arrived on schedule. That imagining had faded, rubbed thin by years of dust. What remained was motion, the steady certainty of moving forward. It was near the edge of a red canyon where the earth split open like an old wound that the day changed. The air had a restless feel, as though the land itself were waiting. His horse slowed without command, ears turning, sensing something beyond the reach of human sight. He followed the animal's instinct and felt the faint tightening in his chest that came before trouble or revelation. In the West, the two often shared the same trail. She appeared first as movement, then as form, a figure against the rock, still as a carved thing, watching. The colors she wore were the colors of the land: clay, sky, shadow. So that she seemed less a stranger than an answer the desert had been holding. Her hair fell dark and heavy, catching the light, and her posture carried a calm that did not ask permission to exist. He did not reach for his weapon, he did not call out. Years of surviving had taught him when sound would break something fragile. The space between them filled with dust motes and heat, with a sense of old histories pressing close. She was Apache, and the land knew it. The canyon walls held stories older than the trails he followed, older than the flags that claimed them. Her eyes met his with a steadiness that unsettled him. There was no fear there, no submission, only a measured consideration, as if she weighed him as he weighed the land. He felt suddenly aware of his own presence, of marks he carried, visible and unseen. The silence stretched, not empty but full, humming with the possibility of change. He had crossed paths with many people in the West, miners driven by hope, soldiers bound by orders, settlers pulled by dreams too large for their wagons. This meeting felt different. It felt deliberate, as though the desert had arranged it. He became aware of the wind shifting, of the horse's breath, of the pulse in his own throat. She stepped closer, her movement unhurried, deliberate. The ground seemed to welcome her, dust barely rising beneath her feet. He noticed the strength in her, not loud but certain, a strength grown from knowing where to stand and when to move. The West often tried to make women invisible or small. She was neither. The canyon narrowed around them, drawing their focus inward. He thought of the lines that divided the land, lines drawn by men who rarely saw the places they claimed. Those lines had cut through lives, had turned neighbors into enemies and homes into battlegrounds. He carried the weight of those lines without fully understanding them, as most men did. Yet here, standing before her, he felt that meaning sharpen. There was something urgent in her presence, a tension like a bow drawn tight. It was not fear that drove it, he sensed, but necessity, the kind that stripped choices down to their Survival wore many faces in the West. He had seen enough to recognize it when it stood before him. The horse shifted again, and the sound echoed softly against the rock. He placed a steady hand on the animal's neck, grounding himself in the familiar. He felt, suddenly, the thinness of the distance between decision and consequence. He had lived long enough to know that moments like this did not announce themselves. They arrived unadorned and left marks that lasted. She gestured toward the open land beyond the canyon, toward trails he knew and dangers she did not. Or perhaps she knew them too well. Her gaze held a plea that did not weaken her, that did not beg so much as ask for a crossing of space, of fate, of two lives shaped by the same unforgiving ground. He found himself thinking of what the desert took and what it gave. It took certainty, took comfort, took those who could not adapt. It gave clarity, gave resilience, gave moments of rare and terrible beauty. This felt like one of those moments, poised on the edge of something that could save or destroy. He had always believed himself finished with choices that mattered beyond the next mile. The road had narrowed his world to what he could see and carry. Yet here was a choice that reached further, that asked for more than movement. It asked for trust, a commodity rarer than water in this land. Sun slid lower, painting the canyon walls in fire and shadow. Time pressed in, not with noise, but with the quiet insistence of the setting day. He understood, with a clarity that surprised him, that to turn away would be to continue as he had always done, and that to stay would be to step into uncertainty that could not be outrun. The desert held its breath. The horse stood ready, a living bridge between places. He felt the pull of the unknown, the echo of a life that might still be shaped by more than survival. In her eyes he saw not a promise made lightly, but an offering forged in need and strength, in a world that rarely allowed either to remain untested. As the last light caught the edge of the canyon, he realized that whatever happened next would not belong to chance. It would belong to choice, and in the West, choice was the most dangerous thing of all. The moment lingered, balanced between movement and stillness, waiting for the first step that would carry them both beyond the canyon's shadow and into a story neither could yet see. The decision did not arrive as a sudden thunderclap. It came the way most truths did in the West, slowly, like heat seeping in stone, impossible to ignore once it settled. The man remained still for a long moment after the sun slipped lower, as if motion itself might shatter the fragile balance holding the world together. The canyon seemed to lean inward, listening, while the desert wind carried scents of dust and sage, old and familiar, yet newly sharp. He understood without words that whatever the Apache woman carried within her plea was not something that could be delayed. The land had taught him that urgency often wore silence instead of sound. People who survived here learned to read what was not said, to hear meaning in posture, in breath, in the way someone held their ground. Her presence spoke of danger close behind, of forces already set in motion. He turned his horse slightly, angling it toward the open stretch beyond the canyon. The movement was small, but it was enough. The animal responded, shifting its weight, as if accepting a change in course that had been decided somewhere deeper than reins or commands. In that motion, the choice became real. She moved then, not rushing, but with the grace of someone who understood timing better than haste. The distance between them closed, and he became aware of how near she was, of the heat radiating from another living body after so many miles alone. It was unsettling and grounding all at once. The West could make a man forget the simple fact of shared breath. As she came closer, he noticed details he had missed before. The faint lines of dust on her skin, the quiet alertness in the way her gaze never lingered too long in one place. This was not a woman unused to flight. This was someone who had measured escape routes and counted steps in the dark. Survival had shaped her as surely as it had shaped him, though by different paths. He lowered himself from the saddle, boots touching earth with a dull thud. The sound echoed more than it should have, emphasizing the vastness around them. He felt the familiar tug of caution. Bringing another into his orbit meant risk, meant responsibility. He had avoided both for years, yet here he stood, already crossing lines he once believed unbreakable. The horse shifted again as she moved closer, and he sensed the animal's curiosity rather than fear. That, more than anything, eased something tight in his chest. He had learned to trust the instincts of creatures that carried him across unforgiving land. If the horse accepted her, perhaps the land did too. The Apache woman reached the saddle with deliberate care. There was no hesitation in her movements, only an awareness of the moment's weight. As she placed her hand against the worn leather, he felt the gravity of what was being asked, not simply passage, but alliance, in the West. Sharing a horse was an intimacy beyond touch. It meant shared balance, shared danger, shared fate if the trail turned deadly. He adjusted the bedroll and supplies without looking at her, making space. As naturally as if he had done this 100 times before, the act surprised him. He had grown used to arranging his life for one. Now his hands moved to accommodate two, and the ease of it unsettled him more than resistance would have. As she climbed behind him, the shift in weight altered the horse's stance, changed the rhythm he had known for years. The animal snorted softly, then settled as if acknowledging a new equation. He felt her presence at his back, steady and warm, close enough that he could sense her breathing. The awareness sent a ripple through him that had nothing to do with fear. They moved out of the canyon as the last light faded, the desert opening before them like a question without an answer. Night approached quickly, as it always did here. Pulling shadows long and deep across the land, he chose a path that skirted known trails, one that followed instinct rather than maps. The fewer eyes that saw them, the better. As they rode, silence between them deepened, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with an understanding that would have taken words too small to contain. He knew she trusted him now, not blindly, but with sharp-eyed trust of someone who understood risk and accepted it anyway. That trust was a weight heavier than any saddlebag. The desert at night revealed another face, cooler, watchful, alive with sounds that daylight drowned out. Coyotes called in the distance, their voices weaving through the darkness. The stars emerged one by one, vast and uncountable, stretching overhead in a reminder of how small any single life truly was. He had found comfort in that reminder before. Tonight it felt different. He became aware of how her presence altered his perception of the land. Places he had crossed without thought now seemed charged with meaning, as if seen through a lens sharpened by her proximity. He wondered briefly what she saw when she looked at this ground, what memories and losses were tied to each ridge and wash. The West held different stories depending on who walked it. Hours passed measured by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. He kept them moving until the moon climbed higher, until the risk of pursuit faded slightly with distance. When he finally slowed, it was near a cluster of low rocks that offered some shelter from wind and sight. He dismounted again. Movements practiced, careful not to startle. The pause felt significant. Stopping meant committing to the night together, to shared vulnerability. He busied himself with routine, checking tack, scanning the horizon, anything to ground himself in familiarity. Yet beneath the motions, his thoughts churned. He had agreed to carry her away from danger, but he did not yet know what she had promised in return, or what price might be demanded of them both. The desert seemed to lean closer, as if eager to witness what would unfold. Firelight flickered briefly as he coaxed a small flame into being, careful to keep it low. The glow revealed her features more clearly now, casting shadows that shifted with each movement. There was fatigue there, yes, but also resolve. Whatever she carried with her, it had not broken her. As they settled into the night, the distance between strangers narrowed into something more complex. He felt the slow realization that his solitary path had already diverged. The road ahead was no longer his alone, and the weight of that truth pressed gently but firmly upon him. Sleep came lightly, broken by dreams of motion and pursuit, of open land and narrowing choices. When he woke before dawn, the fire had burned low, and the world lay hushed beneath a pale sky. The moment felt like a threshold, the end of one life, and the beginning of another. though its shape remained uncertain. He looked out toward the east, where light would soon spill over the horizon, and understood that the promise made in silence would soon demand its cost. Whatever she had offered, whatever no other woman could give, was bound now to his fate, carried forward on the same trail. The desert waited, patient as ever, for the next step. Morning came quietly, the way it always did in the high desert, without announcement or mercy. Light crept across stone and sand, revealing shapes that night had softened and hidden. The man rose before the sun fully cleared the horizon, driven by habit and by the faint unease that had followed him into sleep. The west had taught him that dawn was not safety, only transition. The Apache woman was already awake. She sat near the dying embers, still and watchful, as if she had never truly slept at all. There was no surprise in her posture, no sign of weakness left by the night. If anything, the pale morning light sharpened her presence, revealing a composure that seemed anchored deeper than fatigue. He realized then that rest, for her, was not the absence of danger, but a brief truce with it. He moved quietly through his routine, careful not to disturb the balance that had formed between them. The horse was tended first, water rationed, tack checked with practiced hands. Only after the animal was ready did he allow himself to consider what lay ahead. The land stretched wide and open, deceptively calm, but calm in the west often masked intention. They rode again as the sun climbed, its heat returning with steady insistence. The terrain shifted subtly as they traveled, rising into broken hills where scrub thickened and sightlines shortened. He chose these paths deliberately. Open ground invited pursuit. Uneven land confused it. Whoever she was running from, he suspected, they would not give up easily. As the miles passed, fragments of understanding settled into place without words. He began to sense that she was not merely fleeing danger but carrying something that danger followed. The way she scanned the land, the moments when her attention sharpened toward the horizon, suggested responsibility heavier than self-preservation. This was not fear for her own life alone. It was the weight of consequence. The West had many reasons for men to hunt others: gold, land, orders written far away by hands that never touched soil. He had been on both sides of that hunt in different seasons of his life. He knew the signs: urgency without panic, purpose without cruelty. Whatever forces trailed her were disciplined, patient. That knowledge settled uneasily in him. By midday, the heat pressed down hard, turning the air thick and shimmering. He guided the horse toward a shallow arroyo where sparse trees offered brief relief from the sun. There he slowed, allowing the animal to rest and drink from a hidden seep he knew well. The place felt old, untouched by recent passage, and he hoped it would remain that way. As they paused, he became acutely aware of her nearness again, of how naturally she fit into the rhythm of travel beside him. It disturbed him how quickly the unfamiliar had begun to feel inevitable. He had spent years ensuring nothing tied itself too closely to him. Yet here was a presence that did not ask permission, that did not yield to distance. He found his thoughts drifting backward, to a time before the land had hardened him. He remembered believing that survival was the end of the story, that if one lived long enough, meaning would arrive on its own. The West had disabused him of that notion. Meaning, he had learned, had to be chosen, often at cost, and sometimes it arrived disguised as burden. As the afternoon wore on, the signs he feared began to appear. Tracks, faint but deliberate, cut across the edge of the arroyo. They were days old, perhaps more, but they were not careless. The spacing spoke of riders who knew how to conserve strength, who traveled with purpose rather than haste. His jaw tightened as he studied them. These were not men easily deterred. He erased what he could, disturbing the ground just enough to confuse, then urged the horse onward before doubt could settle. The Apache woman sensed the shift immediately. Her posture changed, subtle but unmistakable, as if bracing against an approaching storm. He did not need to see her face to know that the trail behind them had grown more dangerous. The land rose again toward a ridgeline that offered a wide view of the plains beyond. He avoided the crest, keeping low, skirting the side where shadows lingered longest. The path grew rougher, demanding attention, but he welcomed the difficulty. Smooth roads led to towns, and towns led to questions. Questions led to answers that cost too much. As evening approached, the air cooled, bringing with it the smell of distant rain. Storm clouds gathered far to the north, dark and heavy, promising chaos. He adjusted their course slightly, aiming for a cluster of mesas he knew offered natural shelter. The coming night would not be kind, and he wanted stone between them and wind. When they finally stopped, it was beneath an overhang that bore the marks of ancient use, faded symbols etched into the rock, worn smooth by time. He recognized them only as evidence that others had sought refuge here long before him. The land remembered those who passed through it, even when men did not. As darkness fell, the storm arrived sooner than expected. Wind howled across the plains, carrying sand and the sharp scent of rain. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and persistent. The world narrowed to the space beneath the stone, to the sound of breath and the restless shifting of the horse. Lightning briefly illuminated the land beyond, stark and unforgiving. In that confined space, the weight of her promise pressed closer. He sensed that whatever she had offered was bound to the danger now chasing them, that it was not something easily given or taken. The idea unsettled him. He had accepted many risks in his life, but rarely without knowing their shape. This one remained undefined and therefore more dangerous. The storm raged through the night, blurring tracks and erasing signs. Part of him welcomed the chaos, knowing it would buy them time. Another part understood that storms ended, and pursuit did not always require clear trails. The men who followed would adapt, just as he had learned to do. As the rain finally eased, leaving the land steaming and raw, he felt a shift inside himself. The journey had ceased to be about escape alone. Somewhere along the trail, responsibility had taken root. He was no longer merely a rider passing through another life's crisis. He was entangled now, bound by choice and by the unspoken promise of protection. When dawn broke again, the world looked washed and renewed, deceptively peaceful. He knew better than to trust appearances. The West often offered beauty as distraction, lulling men into mistakes. He rose, preparing to move once more, aware that each mile carried them deeper into a story neither could abandon. As they mounted and turned toward the uncertain path ahead, the silence between them held something new, an understanding that the land itself was now a witness. Whatever she intended to give, whatever no other woman could offer, was tied to truths older than either of them, written into the very ground they crossed. And the ground, patient and unyielding, was not finished asking its price. The storm had erased their tracks, but it had not erased the past, and the next stretch of the journey would force both of them to confront what the land refused to forget. The land ahead changed its face as they traveled deeper into it, shedding the open plains for a maze of stone and shadow. Mesas rose like ancient sentinels, their flat crowns catching the sun while their bases remained locked in cool darkness. Narrow passes cut through them, paths known only to those who had learned the land not by maps but by memory and loss. The man guided the horse into this broken country with care, understanding that such places could hide salvation as easily as they could trap the unwary. The storm had done more than wash away tracks. It had unsettled the land, loosening rocks, swelling hidden gullies, changing familiar routes just enough to punish overconfidence. He moved slower now, reading the ground as he went, watching how the Apache woman responded to each shift in terrain. Her awareness impressed him. She anticipated turns, leaned with the horse, adjusted without instruction. Whatever she carried within her, it had taught her how to move through danger with grace. As the hours passed, a truth he had been avoiding pressed closer. This journey was no longer about simply keeping ahead of pursuit. It was about arriving somewhere specific, though that destination remained unnamed. He sensed purpose in her attention whenever the land opened briefly toward the south. a subtle pull that guided their course more than his own instincts. He allowed it, trusting that she knew something he did not. By midday, the heat grew oppressive again, trapped between stone walls that reflected the sun's glare. The air felt heavy, charged, as if holding a secret. He chose a shaded ravine to stop, where a thin ribbon of water threaded its way through polished rock. It was a place of quiet, the kind that seemed protected from the rest of the world. He wondered how many lives had paused here, how many choices had been weighed in the same stillness. As they rested, he felt a shift in the space between them, subtle but undeniable. The urgency that had driven her movements since the canyon encounter softened, replaced by a measured calm. It was not relief, but resolve. He realized then that whatever she had promised, whatever no other woman could give, was not meant to be offered in flight. It required arrival. The realization stirred unease within him. Arrival meant confrontation with the past, with the forces that hunted her, and with himself. He had spent years avoiding places that demanded reckoning. Motion had been his shield. Now, motion was carrying him towards something he could not outrun. They moved again in the late afternoon, climbing steadily until the ravine opened onto a high shelf overlooking a hidden valley. The sight struck him with unexpected force. Below lay a stretch of land sheltered on all sides by stone, green with growth fed by unseen springs. It was a pocket of life in a harsh world, a place the desert had chosen to protect. He had never seen it before, though he had ridden within miles of it countless times. The Apache woman's attention fixed on the valley, and he understood without explanation that this place mattered. The way she held herself suggested reverence rather than relief. This was not simply a hiding place, it was a threshold. They descended carefully as the sun dipped low, the valley filling with golden light. The air felt different here, cooler, richer, carrying the scent of water and living things. The horse sensed it too, quickening its step, drawn by promise. He felt a tightening in his chest, a recognition that this land held stories far older than his own. As dusk settled, they reached the valley floor. The man dismounted, taking in the details: stone circles half buried in earth, fire, blackened rocks arranged with intention, paths worn smooth by generations of feet. This was not abandoned ground, it was remembered ground. The weight of it pressed against him, making him acutely aware of his status as an outsider. The Apache woman moved with quiet certainty, leading him deeper into the valley toward a stand of cottonwoods that whispered softly in the evening breeze. There, near the base of the largest tree, she knelt and brushed away soil, revealing a stone marker carved with symbols he did not understand. He did not need to. Meaning radiated from the act itself. As she worked, memory stirred within him, fragments of stories overheard in towns, tales dismissed as superstition by men who feared what they could not claim, stories of sacred places, of responsibilities passed down through blood and oath rather than paper. He had always listened from a distance, respectful but detached. Now those stories stood before him, undeniable. When she finished uncovering the marker, she remained still, head bowed, as if listening. The valley seemed to respond, the wind easing, the sounds of night settling into a steady rhythm. He felt something shift, not just in her, but in himself. The promise she carried was no longer abstract. It was bound to this place, to its survival. Understanding came slowly, like dawn after a long night. The gift she offered was not something that could be held or traded. It was trust, deeper than companionship, a bond forged by shared protection of something sacred. She had chosen him not because he was the strongest or the fastest, but because he was unclaimed, unrooted, capable of choosing this place without divided loyalty. The realization humbled him. He had believed his freedom lay in solitude, in belonging nowhere. Yet here was an invitation to belong not through ownership, but through guardianship, to protect without possessing, to stand between this valley and those who would destroy it for profit or power. The weight of that responsibility settled heavy and sure within him. He thought of the men who might follow them here, men who saw land only as resource, history only as obstacle. He had crossed paths with such men before, sometimes standing against them, sometimes stepping aside. This time, stepping aside would not be an option. Night deepened, stars emerging above the valley rim. He built a small fire with care, mindful of respect rather than concealment. The flames flickered softly, illuminating the cottonwood leaves and casting long shadows that seemed to dance with memory. In that light, he felt the edges of his old life blur. Sleep came differently here. It was deeper, filled with dreams not of running but of standing fast, of roots sinking into soil long denied. When he woke before dawn, the valley lay hushed. Expectant, he sensed that this calm would not last. Sacred places drew attention, just as vulnerable ones did. As the first light touched the valley floor, he knew the pursuit would find them again. The storm had delayed it, but not ended it. The men following would be persistent, driven by motives that did not fade with difficulty, and when they arrived, choices would have to be made that could not be undone. He rose, feeling the quiet certainty of commitment settle fully within him. The Apache woman stood nearby, watching the horizon, her posture calm, resolute. Whatever lay ahead, it would be faced here on ground that remembered those who defended it. The valley held its breath, waiting. The gift had been revealed not as something given, but as something shared, and the next chapter of their journey would test whether that shared bond could withstand the violence of the world beyond the stone walls. The valley did not announce the coming danger. It never had. Places like this survived by appearing ordinary to careless eyes, by letting threats pass close without ever realizing what they missed. Yet the man felt the shift before the land revealed it. Long years on the frontier had tuned him to changes too small for logic. An unease that crept in without reason, a tightening behind the ribs that warned of approaching violence. Morning rose clean and bright, the kind of deceptive beauty the West specialized in. Sunlight spilled across grass and stone, catching dew on leaves, making the valley seem untouched by the world beyond its walls. Birds moved through the cottonwoods, and for a moment it would have been easy to believe that this place could remain hidden forever. But the world did not forget so easily. He stood at the edge of the valley, scanning distant ridges, his gaze lingering where stone met sky. There, faint but unmistakable, was movement. Not the wandering drift of wildlife, not the slow patience of the land itself, but the deliberate advance of men who believed they were owed something. The storm had slowed them, confused their trail, but it had not broken their resolve. They had come. The realization settled heavy, but it did not bring panic. Instead, it sharpened him. Fear had never served him well, preparation had. He moved through the valley with purpose, committing its details to memory as if seeing it for the first time. Every rise in the ground, every narrow cut between rocks, every place where a man could stand unseen or fall exposed. This land would soon be tested, and he intended to know it better than those who sought to claim it. The Apache woman watched him from beneath the cottonwoods, her expression unreadable but calm. There was no surprise in her posture, no shock at the arrival of danger. She had known this moment would come. The promise she had carried was never meant to avoid conflict, only to choose where it would be met. He understood then that this valley was not simply a refuge. It was a line drawn in the earth. The hours passed slowly, each one tightening the tension like a drawn wire. He prepared quietly, conserving motion, conserving energy. The horse was moved to a hidden pocket where the land folded in on itself, safe from immediate view. Supplies were checked, positioned where they could be reached without haste. Nothing was rushed. Rushing led to mistakes. And mistakes here would cost more than a single life. As the sun climbed higher, the figures on the ridge became clearer. Riders, several of them, moving with confidence born of numbers and entitlement. These were not desperate men. They were organized, accustomed to taking what lay before them. He recognized the type easily. The West was thick with them. Men who believed survival gave them permission. He felt anger stir, low and controlled. Not the wild kind that blinded, but the steady burn that clarified intention. He had seen too many places ruined by such men, too many quiet sanctuaries turned into scars on the land. He had walked away before, telling himself it was not his fight, that the world was too large for one man to guard. That excuse no longer held. The Apache woman moved closer, her presence grounding rather than distracting. She belonged to this place in a way he never could, yet she had chosen him to stand with her. The trust implicit in that choice pressed against him, demanding answer. He did not resent it. For the first time in years, he welcomed the weight. The riders descended toward the valley with little caution, confidence making them careless. They did not know what they approached, did not understand that this place had been defended long before their kind ever crossed these lands. He watched them enter the outer edge, their voices carrying faintly on the air, careless and loud. The land responded as it always had, by offering silence. The first confrontation unfolded without ceremony. A sudden disruption, a moment of confusion as the valley revealed its teeth. The man moved with precision, not driven by rage but by necessity. Every step was measured, every decision final. He did not think in terms of victory or defeat, only of keeping the line intact. Time fractured into sharp, vivid moments, the sound of boots on stone, the echo of movement between rock walls, the way the air itself seemed to tighten under pressure. The hunters realized too late that they had walked into ground that did not want them. Their advantage bled away with each misstep. When it ended, the valley fell quiet again, as if nothing had disturbed it. The riders who remained fled the way they had come, carrying with them a new understanding of consequence. The man stood still for a long moment after, letting his breath settle, letting the echoes fade. He felt the cost then, not physical, but something deeper. Violence always demanded payment, even when it was justified. He had paid it many times before, but this felt different. This time, the cost had purchased something lasting. As the sun dipped toward afternoon, he walked the valley's edge, ensuring the threat had truly passed. The land seemed to accept his presence now, not as a trespasser but as a temporary guardian. He felt it in the way the wind moved, in the quiet persistence of life continuing around him. The Apache woman stood near the stone mocker when he returned, her posture relaxed but resolute. The promise she had offered had not been words or possession. It had been belonging, not ownership, but shared responsibility. In standing with her, he had crossed a boundary within himself. He realized then that the gift she offered was permanence of a different kind, not the permanence of fences or deeds, but of purpose. She had given him a reason to stop running, a place where his strength mattered beyond his own survival. As evening settled, they sat within the valley's calm, the fire burning low. The world beyond would continue, as it always had, restless, greedy, unforgiving. But here, for now, there was balance. He knew this was not an ending. The West did not allow such easy conclusions. The valley would need protection. Again, the world would press against its borders in new ways, and he would have to choose again and again whether to stand or walk away. For the first time, he knew the answer. The stars emerged. Overhead, ancient and unchanging, witnesses to countless stories like this one, stories of land defended not by conquest, but by commitment. He felt the quiet certainty of having stepped into his place, however long or brief it might be. The night deepened, and with it came a sense of closure mixed with anticipation. One chapter had ended in blood and resolve. Another waited just beyond the darkness, shaped not by flight or conflict, but by what came after survival. The valley had been claimed not by force, but by choice, and the final chapter would reveal what it truly meant to remain. The valley changed after the violence, though not in ways that could be seen at first glance. Grass still bent with the breeze, water still whispered through stone, and the cottonwoods continued their quiet conversation with the sky. Yet beneath the familiar rhythms, something had shifted. The land had been tested and had answered. It remembered who stood for it when memory mattered. The man felt that change within himself as well. In the days that followed, He moved through the valley with a different awareness, no longer as a guest passing through, but as a presence woven briefly into its story. He did not mistake this for ownership. The West punished such thinking quickly. Instead, he carried himself with restraint, understanding that belonging was not something taken but something maintained. The Apache woman remained close, not out of need but out of shared purpose. The urgency that had once driven her steps was gone, replaced by a calm vigilance. The promise she had carried, so heavy it had bent her path, had been honored not through words or ceremony, but through action. The gift she had offered had taken shape in the only way that mattered here. Survival aligned with meaning. Time resumed its steady pace. Days unfolded with simple tasks that felt strangely profound after the chaos, repairing worn paths, tending the horse, watching the sky for signs of weather or distant movement. These acts were not busy work. They were affirmations that life continued, that the valley's story did not end with bloodshed. At night, beneath the spread of stars, man found himself reflecting on the life he had led before this place. He saw it now with sharper clarity, a series of escapes dressed up as freedom, of roads chosen because they asked nothing beyond endurance. He had believed detachment was strength, that to belong nowhere was to remain unbroken. The valley had taught him otherwise. Here, commitment did not diminish him, it focused him. Energy once spent avoiding attachment now flowed into watchfulness, into care. He felt older and younger all at once, older for the weight he now carried willingly, younger for the possibility that still unfolded before him. The Apache woman moved through the valley like someone in conversation with the land. She did not command it or bow to it. She listened. Watching her, he understood more clearly what she had meant by her silent offer. She had not promised safety or comfort. She had promised connection to something enduring, something that would outlast both of them. There came a morning when the valley felt complete again. The quiet no longer held tension, only balance. The man sensed it instinctively, the way one senses the end of a long storm. The danger had passed for now, and with it came a different kind of reckoning. He knew he could not stay forever. The realization did not wound him as he expected. It arrived gently, like the truth of a season ending. The valley did not need a permanent guardian from outside its people. It needed allies when threatened, witnesses when memory was challenged. He had served his part, and the land acknowledged it without asking more. The Apache woman seemed to understand this as well. There was no sorrow in her bearing, no sense of abandonment. What had been shared did not require proximity to endure. The bond forged here existed beyond distance, rooted in a moment when two paths crossed and chose not to turn away. Preparation for departure unfolded without ceremony. Supplies were gathered, the horse readied. Each act carried a quiet finality, yet none felt like loss. The valley did not close behind him as a door shuts. It remained open in memory and intention, a place he could return to if needed, if called on. The morning he left, the light rose soft and clear, painting the valley in gold. He stood at its edge for a long moment, committing its shape to heart, the curve of the land, the sheltering stone, hidden water that sustained it. He knew these details would surface in dreams, in moments of doubt on distant trails. As he mounted the horse, he felt the familiar sensation of movement return, but it no longer carried the same restlessness. This time he rode not to escape, but to continue. The difference mattered. He turned toward the open land beyond the valley, where the west stretched, endless and demanding as ever. The road awaited, full of its usual trials. But he carried something new with him now, not a possession, not a promise spoken aloud, but an understanding earned through choice. The gift the Apache woman had offered, the one no other woman could give, revealed itself fully only as he rode away. It was not love in the way songs described it, nor devotion bound by words or vows. It was recognition. She had seen him not as he pretended to be, but as he could become, and in doing so, she had given him back to himself, reshaped. The West did not soften because of this. Towns would still rise and fall. Men would still chase fortune and ruin with equal hunger. Violence would remain close to the surface, as it always had. But he would meet it differently now, guided by the knowledge that some places were worth standing for, even briefly. As the valley slipped from view, swallowed by distance and stone, he felt no regret, only gratitude. The trail ahead curved toward the horizon, dust rising with each step of the horse. He rode on, carrying the valley's quiet strength within him, aware that though he moved alone once more, he was no longer unanchored. Somewhere behind him, the land continued its patient work of remembering, and somewhere ahead, the West waited, unchanged and eternal, ready to test what he had learned when he chose, at last, to stay.